you, Speaker. And as I was saying yesterday, Canada's fiscal fundamentals are strong and they are sustainable. But to truly understand the strength behind this performance, you have to consider the hard work that took place long before through actions our government took to pay down debt, lower taxes, reduce red tape, and promote free trade and innovation. But most importantly, our government has paid down a significant amount of debts when times were good.
Here, here.
And kept our debt to GDP ratio well below our G7 counterparts. As a result, when the recession hit, we had the fiscal room necessary to respond, unlike other nations that were forced to pile vast amounts of unaffordable new debt onto old. We kept our promises to the Canadian people. We took action to keep taxes low for Canadian families and businesses. For example, our government cut the GST from 7 to 6 to 5%. We created tax-free savings accounts, which now benefit more than 8 million Canadians. We established a $5,000 tax credit for first-time homebuyers. We reduced the lowest personal income tax rate and increased the basic personal exemption. Introduced income splitting for seniors. Brought in arts and fitness tax credit for our children. And we lowered the small business tax rate to 11% and more.
The member is about 10 feet away from me, and I can't hear him because of noise in this House. If you want to carry on a conversation, leave the chamber. Take it outside. Resuming debates.
Thank you, Speaker. Overall, the federal tax burden is now at its lowest level in half a century. As a result, our government's low tax plan, in 2013, the average Canadian family now pays $3,200 less in taxes. Our Conservative government recognizes the vital role small businesses play in the economy and in job creation, and that's why we are committed to helping them grow and succeed. Speaker, we know they have been growing. We see the results. Canada is leading the world in job creation with more than 1 million net new jobs created since the recession. With lower taxes, businesses can now invest in new equipment, hire more workers, and expand their operations. Tax cuts benefit Canadians, all Canadians, including both Ontario and Quebec's manufacturing sectors. In fact, Susan Benoit, president of Aero Montreal, had this to say, quote, "By actively supporting this sector with effective and well-designed programs, the Canadian government is helping ensure the industry's long-term growth and the creation of high-quality jobs for Canadians," end of quote. And in Ontario, Carlos Paz Soldan, president and CEO of the Toronto-based Tenet Computer Group, added that the, quote, "budget recognizes the strong link between the innovation needs of firms such as mine and the skills and talent of college and polytechnic students across the country," end of quote. Richard Patton, president and CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, added that he was, quote, "pleased by the federal government's focus on manufacturing, jobs, and growth. Funding to encourage innovation and improve the competitiveness of Ontario's manufacturing sector was especially welcomed," end of quote. So as you can see, Speaker, specific actions taken by our government have enabled businesses to grow. For example, during the recession, our Conservative government extended and expanded the job-creating hiring credit for small business, which benefits an estimated 560,000 employers. Increased and indexed the lifetime capital gains exemption to make investing in small business more rewarding. Expanded the accelerated capital cost allowance to further encourage investments in clean energy, generation, and more. During the recession, the opposition voted against these tax relief measures. Now, why does the opposition continually vote against supporting Canadian businesses? Why do they not support Canadian workers? Well, Speaker, if the opposition had their way, they would have the government engage in risky spending schemes or forcing a $21 billion carbon tax on Canadian consumers or hiking taxes on job creation, thereby stalling economic growth. These ideas won't work. Indeed, time has proven over and over that the way to support economic growth is by lowering taxes. Simply put, Speaker, you cannot tax your way to economic prosperity. Economic Action Plan 2013 builds on our government's significant action to support small businesses since 2006, which includes reducing the small business tax rate from 12% to 11%, increasing the small business limit to $500,000, lowering the federal corporate income tax rate to 15% to help create jobs and economic growth for Canadian families and communities, eliminating the corporate surtax for all corporations in 2008, which was particularly beneficial to small business corporations as the surtax represented a larger proportion of the overall payable tax. This also includes introducing a code of conduct for the credit and debit card industry. Indeed, our government just recently improved the code by expanding it to include mobile payments, a move welcomed by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which said, quote, "This will help make the code even more relevant and useful to small business owners, and we applaud the government," end of quote. Overall, Speaker, a typical small business now has $28,600 in savings because our Conservative government's low tax plan. Now, having said that, Speaker, our government is under no illusions that our work is finished. The global economy remains fragile, with growth in advanced economies slower than expected, and Canada is certainly not immune. That is why Canada's Economic Action Plan actively pursues new trade and investment opportunities, particularly with large, dynamic, and fast-growing economies. Indeed, our government recently completed negotiations on a comprehensive economic trade agreement with the European Union. This agreement alone has the potential to add more than 80,000 net new jobs to Canada. But don't take my word for it, Speaker. Let's hear what others have to say. In fact, John Manley, President and CEO of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, agrees that, quote, "The comprehensive economic and trade agreement will create jobs, spur investment, and promote economic growth," end of quote. Unlike the opposition, we understand that the pursuit of free trade is beneficial for Canada's economy. Our government's trade agenda has already made Canada one of the most open and globally engaged economies in the world. Since 2006, we have reached free trade agreements with 9 countries and are negotiating with many more. We have also concluded foreign investment, promotion, and protection agreements with 16 countries, and currently in active negotiations with many others. Canada has also joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. We are actively pursuing new trade and investment opportunities in large, dynamic, and fast-growing economies such as China, India, and Japan, reflecting our belief that freer and more open trade is a key stimulus for economic global recovery. Unlike the opposition, we know that by growing international trade and creating additional export opportunities for Canadian businesses, we will improve the standard of living for all Canadians. Free and open trade has long been a powerful engine for Canada's economy. Canadian businesses need to access key export markets in order to take advantage of new opportunities. Economic Action Plan 2013 builds on these measures through targeted actions that will help our manufacturers and businesses continue to succeed on the world stage and secure a prosperous future for all Canadians. Now, Speaker, our government is continuing to build on our sound economic position with the implementation of Economic Action Plan 2013. The second Budget Implementation Act will deliver a 3-year freeze on employment insurance premium increases. This tax relief will help support Canada's continued economic recovery and sustained business-led long-term growth. But again, don't take my word for it, Speaker. Let's hear what others have to say. Diane Brisbois, President and CEO of the Retail Council of Canada, agrees that, quote, "This freeze on premiums will mean more money for employers to invest in other important areas such as employment, training, and infrastructure," end of quote. Furthermore, the employment insurance freeze will enhance Canada's globally competitive business environment. The freeze will help to attract foreign investment in Canada, create jobs for Canadians, and foster long-term economic growth. In fact, Dan Kelly, President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, agrees that, quote, "Payroll taxes like EI are particularly challenging for small business. The announcement of an EI rate freeze is fantastic news for Canada's entrepreneurs and their employees. This move will keep hundreds of millions of dollars in the pockets of employers and employees, which can only be a positive thing for the Canadian economy," end of quote. Most importantly, Speaker, freezing EI rates will have a significant impact on low-income Canadians. Joyce Reynolds, the Canadian Restaurant and Food Services Executive Vice President of Government Affairs, notes that, quote, "Payroll costs have a significant impact on overall labor costs. They are a barrier to hiring, particularly for inexperienced workers. We are pleased the government is demonstrating commitment to youth employment by holding the line on these profit-insensitive costs," end of quote. Now, Speaker, unlike the opposition, our government understands that tax relief is important to Canadian families. I encourage members opposite to vote in favor of this important measure, which will leave more money in the hands of Canadians. Now, our government remains firmly committed to supporting Canadian jobs and fostering long-term prosperity for Canadians and their families. Canada's low-tax approach continues to be a beacon to other nations around the world in a time of global economic uncertainty. And Speaker, our efforts have certainly not gone unrecognized. Indeed, KPMG's Competitive Alternatives 2012 report concluded that Canada's total business taxes are more than 40% lower than those in the United States, and confirmed that Canada has the lowest tax burden on business in the G7. Along with promoting investment and our support for free and open trade, the government continues to support the low-tax environment that is required to create jobs and economic growth. Speaker, Canada is now one of the top 5 destinations in the world to start a business. Colleen McMorrow of Ernst & Young remarked that, quote, Canada has emerged as a real leader in fostering an entrepreneurial culture. Canada also offers a supportive tax and regulatory environment for entrepreneurs. All these factors are combining to really promote the growth of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship from coast to coast. She concluded by saying, Canada's government has been highly supportive of entrepreneurs, providing regulatory and tax regimes that have enabled startups and growing companies to flourish, end of quote. Now, clearly, Speaker, Canada's competitive tax system plays a crucial role in supporting economic growth. These tax reductions will leave more money for the private sector to reinvest in the machinery, equipment, information, technology, and other physical capital that will further boost the recent productivity gains we've seen in businesses across Canada. Speaker, most importantly, lower taxes will allow businesses to hire more Canadians and offer higher wages as they expand production and take on the world. I encourage all members to support Bill C-4. Thank you, Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for York South Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have some questions for my colleague from the riding to the north of me concerning this budget bill, which doesn't include only budgetary items. This government has included some workers' health and safety things that, in fact, strips the powers from the health and safety officers and was never mentioned in the budget, and yet is in the budget implementation bill. And I think that if the workers at the Bombardier plant in his riding were facing the same kind of action by the provincial government, they would be pounding on his door complaining about what the provincial government was doing to them. And yet, here they are proposing something similar that was never in the budget. And so my question is, why is it there? Why is some of the consumer protection things that the government has touted as being necessary not there? They could have been. Why are the Conservatives insistent on making this a time allocation bill when, in fact, the government the opposition was prepared to agree on the amount of time it was going to have? So we have a government that prorogued and spent a lot of time not in the House, and yet they want to hurry this up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And I would say that perhaps the honourable member for York South Weston was not listening clearly to my speech. This budget 2013, Economic Action Plan 2013, has received widespread support from the business community, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Canadian Council of Chief Executives, a variety of other business organizations who say everything we have done in this budget to create jobs is welcomed, and the proof is in the pudding. We have created over 1 million net new jobs since the peak of the recession in 2009, and we continue to create jobs. We are the #1 job creator in the G7. We receive praise from a variety of international organizations, from The Economist, from Forbes magazine. We're the best place to be doing business, as I indicated in my speech. A variety of organizations have said that, from the OECD to the IMF, Forbes magazine. Speaker, what is really important here is that our government is clearly focused on what matters most to Canadians. That's jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity. And with that in mind, we are clearly focused on what matters most. Like a laser beam, we're focused on the economy. And as such, I would encourage the NDP and the Liberals to join us and to help us create even more jobs in this great country of Canada, so they can go back to their constituents at voting time and say, look, we helped the Canadian government to create jobs, and that's what mattered most to you, and we played a role in all of that. Thank you, Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire of the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
I think it's important for us to note that when the Prime Minister was in opposition, he was exceptionally critical of the government of the day because there was a 100-page budget implementation bill. And now that he is in the Prime Minister's chair, he's increased it almost tenfold. Hundreds and hundreds of pages. This particular bill, 400 pages. Huge pieces of legislation being proposed that are completely and absolutely irrelevant to the passage of the budget. Now, that's one issue. The other issue, which is equally, and maybe many would say is just as important, is the fact that the government has brought in time allocation. So here you have all these potential pieces of legislation that should have been standalone, all incorporated into the budget bill, Mr. Speaker, and then the government, this Prime Minister, more than any other Prime Minister in the history of Canada, is saying, we are now going to put a finite amount of time. They're putting in time allocation or closure to force this bill through second reading. That prevents MPs from being able to talk and debate and give due diligence to the budget bill, let alone all the other things that they're trying to bring in through the back door. My question to the member is, how, in good faith, does he believe that colleagues from all sides of this House are able to positively contribute to all the debate that should be required in order to give good diligence on Bill C-4?
The honourable member for York Centre.
Well, thank you once again, Speaker. And I would just respond by saying that, once again, our government remains on what matters most to Canadians, and that's jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity. And we've provided a number of supports for job creators in Canada, particularly the small business sector, extending and expanding the hiring tax credit, as I indicated in my speech, which will help 560,000 employers. We've just closed negotiations on the CETA agreement, which will give access to Canadian business to 500,000 new customers in the European market, which is the largest single free trade agreement ever negotiated on the face of the earth. Second, Mr. Speaker, the agreement is precedent-setting because we now have access to 2.7 million of public sector procurement opportunities in Europe, which is completely unprecedented. And I would encourage the member from Winnipeg to take the benefits of the CETA agreement to his constituents and the businesses in his riding and encourage them to take advantage of the wonderful economic opportunities that lay ahead in the CETA agreement. One other thing I would just add, though, I understand that his candidate in the riding of Toronto Centre, who's running for election on November 25th, Chrystia Freeland, has said, and I understand she's one of the economic advisors to his leader, I say amen to raising taxes. That shows the difference between our party and the Liberal Party.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Newmarket Aurora.
Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his speech. Mr. Speaker, we have come through some very difficult times over the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen the world go through a global recession, and what we know right now is that Canada, although many other countries are struggling with their debt load, where it's really out of control, Canada is in the best fiscal position in the G7. And some of the facts are that Canada's net debt to GDP ratio was 34.6% in 2012, the lowest among G7 countries. Germany is only the second lowest at 57.2. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're looking at with this budget is creating more opportunity, more jobs in our economy. With more people who are working, there are going to be more people paying taxes, allowing us to get back to our objective of a balanced budget in 2015. I wonder, since the member in his previous life worked with many, many companies in Toronto, if he can speak a little bit more in the House about what these kinds of actions that we're taking will mean to these job creators in our own economy.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her very good question. And indeed, she's absolutely right. I mean, our government took very strong action before the recession in lowering public debt by $36 billion, which was significant. That gave us now the maneuverability and the cushion space that we were able to use to be able to respond in a positive way during this past recession. And we did so in a way that outstripped the economic performance of every other G7 country in the world. What we did was we were able to strategically plan, and we're the only party with a plan. Let me add that. We're the only party with a plan. The Liberals, the NDP, don't have plans. Well, the Liberal plan is non-existent, and the NDP plan is just to raise taxes, including a $21 billion carbon tax. But let me tell you something, that our party remains focused on, like I said before, what matters most to Canadians, and that's jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity. And once again, the proof, my friends, is clearly seen. 1 million net new jobs created since the peak of the recession, and we have the strongest job creation record of any country around the world. We have received accolades from international organizations, from Canadian Business Association, from Canadian business leaders. You know, it's Canadian business that creates jobs. It's not Canadian government that creates jobs. We can create the conditions that will foster Canadian job growth, and we have done that through our economic action plan. We have a plan. The opposition doesn't.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. We're almost out of time. A short question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I attempted to get in on the debate earlier about time allocation on this bill. There were so many things said there that were completely false, such as the notion that large budget omnibus bills are any part of the tradition of this Parliament. They are offensive to parliamentary democracy. The largest in all history was the one referred to earlier today by the parliamentary secretary before the current administration, and that was in 2005. It was 120 pages long, and it was offensive in its day to have two budget omnibus bills in the year 2013, as we had in 2012, both of them, in all cases, over 300 pages long, is outrageous. And to close debate on them so early is a further outrage. I asked my honourable friend if he doesn't find it troubling that in the last session of Parliament, 38% of all government legislation came bound together in unrelated pieces of legislation for one vote, and now that these very large, unwieldy, and unrelated pieces of legislation are forced into time allocation.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Well, thank you, Speaker. What I find offensive is that during the 90s, the Liberal government balanced the budget on the backs of Canada's most vulnerable citizens by cutting social services, by cutting funding to education, to health care. That's the way they balance the budget. The way we balance the budget is by lowering taxes and creating the conditions whereby businesses can create jobs in this country, because everybody deserves a job. And I'll tell you something. Is every Canadian employed right now? No. And that's why our job is not finished. And we will never say our job is finished until every Canadian who wants to work has a job and has the opportunity to have a job. That's when we can say our job is done. So I would encourage the opposition, rather than to criticize where there is no criticism warranted, to join us in our plan to create jobs and foster economic opportunity and growth in this country of Canada. Thank you, Speaker.